the LinkedIn one. Good morning, LinkedIn. Happy Friday. Welcome to another Friday morning edition. Let's build properties in HubSpot with Matthew Ruxton. How you doing, man?
Took the wrong time to take a drink. I am doing great. How are you, Chris?
I'm doing fantastic. How's the doggy doing?
He's doing good.
Yeah,
He's staring at me from across the room, so he's doing good today.
awesome.
Being a little
So
less stupid.
always nice to have that kind of audience, around sometimes
Oh
just to
yeah,
keep you in check.
great feedback tool.
Um, well, thanks to Kyle Jepson for teeing this up, reminding me this was a thing. The
Yeah,
reason I love this regular cadence of content is there's always something to talk about. Um, and I think if we can talk about stuff like this more, we'll be able to catch up with the HubSpot platform someday. Uh, so the
someday.
new
Trying really hard.
properties and we're just going to dive right in. I know you were going to show stuff, but I think I'm going to pull mine up first
Yeah, that works for me.
because I have yet to play with it.
Oh yeah, get in
And
there.
I just confirmed it was working. So I'm going to
I mean,
share
I give
my
a little
screen.
backstory while you get it pulled up, which
Yeah.
is for a long time, I think we've all bemoaned, and I've noticed a trend. I don't know if HubSpot's listening, but I appreciate if they are. I've noticed a trend that there's been a lot of movement away from using that what I refer to as the right sidebar of shame. So like a lot of times it'll come out whenever you do something that's like, here's the right sidebar. And as someone who loves tabs and having many windows open, it's really awkward when you have to pull that open and do something else. And when you refresh, like the whole screen like
Oh God,
refreshes, then it pulls
it's
it
the
back out. And then
worst.
it's just so much UI happening at once that it's painful. So like with the new create property thing, and if you want to go ahead and you can go click it up here, it's now just a whole modal. Like it's
What?
a whole thing. And honestly, it's quite great. Um, actually do I would say, Chris, let's go look at an existing property because I think that's where you'll see like the real value is a already built property. If you
Yep.
find something that's
Okay, let's do
not too
from the
crazy.
sync one. Sync is probably too crazy, but or I could do let's do a native one,
Uh,
maybe.
yeah,
All right, let's do a deal property.
that was a good one. Deal stage. Everyone loves deal stage.
Yeah, stage. All right.
So if you remember that little right sidebar, it led you through a process. It was very guided and it was great, but it suffered a little bit from four or five things. And with some of the recent changes, and I don't know if you're familiar with this. I know if we have in our business, we've opted into PI. We have a lot of PII. We store a lot of sensitive data. We've started adopting some of the sensitive data practices HubSpot's put out there. The new sensitive data creation property is now a step in the create property process, which has now made a thing that was 4 steps, I think 5 steps. So it takes a little
Uh,
longer. And I'm begging one day we'll be able to ability to import properties en masse. It will come, I believe, in HubSpot. But until that day comes, they've at least improved the UI so it's not as painful when you're trying to make many properties at once. But this whole change I think is huge. So like you have this new like property details page. It gives you the property label, the object type, the group, and the description all in one slide. Before I think it was split across two. I
yeah,
think that's
and let's.
awesome.
I actually pulled up another
Oh, yeah.
portal
The old version.
to just take it in for a second. So this is the same click, right? So I click on deal
Yeah.
stage and open up the sidebar, something that already exists. Got these different tabs in here to find out stuff. And then in this case, we have our options.
Yeah.
Uh, I know the temper page, like this was always, man, it's all rushing back about the things that get annoying. Like when you try to add options and it likes to
Oh man.
just kick you out if you don't save it fast enough or if you don't keep typing.
Yep.
Uh,
Or your arch nemesis Google comes in and goes, "You need to log into Chrome again," and
yeah,
then you just everything you've done has just been lost. Yeah, it's not fun. And
yeah,
as someone who recently experienced the pain and suffering of removing properties, we're going through the process right now. We have a lot of properties, and the portal I'm working in is not that old. I'd say it's only about 2 years old, but there's a lot of properties that were created by people thinking they were creating the right thing, and they're not the right thing, or they're duplicative properties or things like that. And as we do cleanup for things like property sync, we're like, we now don't need this property to appear as three objects. Now we only know one, and a property sync would be a better option. We're going through that process of cleaning it up. You have to go through the beloved used in function and figure out, because you can't archive things in HubSpot unless they're being used nowhere, which is a blessing and a curse to some extent. You have to go through that use in object. And in the old UI, it was painful because like I would end up having this open, and like you'd have like it's showed in a report, in a view, in a workflow, and a cards, and like all those options are there, and you have to then drop them down. And I then open another window, and I'm going to these places and like removing its existence or updating a view or updating a report. You'd have to refresh, and when you'd refresh this page, sometimes it would just go back to the property page, and then you're like, I gotta click. It's just extra steps.
Yeah.
So the new property settings option is just so much cleaner to use. When you click used in, it's its own little sidebar option. It gives you all these things, and you can now just like open it in a tab and refresh this page to see the updates in real time. It's just so much cleaner to use. And
Yeah.
really, if you're using any sort of conditional logic, it's a lot cleaner to use. I don't know if you have an example of a property in your portal with conditional logic, but we use conditional logic a lot for our ticketing. We use a lot of ticketing in our portal, and we'll do like we have categories and subcategories, and those subcategories are controlled by like the controlling category. And being able to just see those like conditional logic options a little cleaner is just so much easier.
Let's see. I think I've got, actually, I could just check here. All right, so I got dark funnel source. So this is like, some of this stuff was already in play, like,
Yeah.
especially like the property logic and like basically.
We've been moving towards this. I think it's just more of a cleanup of like, let's take away like the sidebar when we're already doing like the full screen modal.
Right. And we
And
got
especially
to,
for people on small screens too. Like if you're one of those people, I don't rock. I have a 13-inch laptop. I rock a wide screen at home. When I travel, it's painful because I forget that I don't have my ultra wide. But when you're working on a smaller page, or you're working on even multiple tabs in an ultra wide, being able to see this in one place is just so much. It's such a much easier scalability. Like it's a lot easier when you're working on if you're working on multiple pages, if you're working on like smaller screens. Whereas the old modal, like it would slowly get smaller and smaller and smaller, and you're like you couldn't really make it bigger, you couldn't make it smaller. Like it was just kind of it lived in the kind of world that you were in. So it's really nice, like the way they rebuilt this to kind of really
nice.
just improve the UI. And there's been a couple. I don't know if you're familiar with they made a UI change, I think, to the workflow creator, and it like asked you like the properties, and it was kind of a miss, which is rare for HubSpot. It's something they do. Like I'll admit they make misses sometimes. They rolled it back very quickly, but even the new workspace workflow tool, when you go to create a new workflow, like even that modal is very similar to the new properties modal. They've kind of condensed things down to be more cognizant of your screen real estate, which I think is a huge improvement in a great direction for HubSpot, because there is so much more tools in HubSpot now that you need to see all those things. Once you start rocking around with custom objects, you can have like up to 10 custom objects. And if you go the crazy route of having to pay for more because you need more, it's hard. So I think that being able to kind of these little changes are the things you like to see, and things that you don't see in other CRMs. I'm not going to name them by name, but in other CRMs, you just don't see this. You don't see these sort of like small UI changes that just make quality of life so much better.
Yeah. And I think that's where like you mentioned, like as soon as the sensitive info stuff was added, and it
Mm-hmm.
adds another step, and it's like, while this is the container for this process to happen, like they only
Mm-hmm.
have certain ways to get it in there. So they start adding like little links and these
Yeah.
things, and
Yeah.
then hopefully, so I didn't want to do that. I wanted to go back.
Yeah.
You just have to fit way too much. Like the space is not designed for the moment we are in right now.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's definitely trying to fit, your gourmet lunch inside of a Lunchables container. Like it's just not going to work. There's three spots, and you get those three spots, and they're not going to change. So I think that this kind of movement to this is very similar to like the email editor, the forms editor. If you've been enrolled in the new forms beta, very
Yeah.
similar like design. So I think we're seeing a kind of overall shift in the UI to being a bit more approachable, but also more consistent across tools because I think for a long time it's not been. Um, and as people like myself as an administrator, you are in the depths of everything. It's a lot easier for you. These are improvements that are definitely aimed at admins and partners and people who are doing a lot more back end work a lot easier. Like this, I'm so glad you found it. I can't remember where it was. This is amazing. I used to get so mad dragging things around to reorder, and now you can just number them and be like, no, this is one, this is three, this is four, this is two, and it just resets it. I think that's one of those sort of like you don't realize how amazing it is until
Awesome.
you actually
Yeah.
can use it. Because I know that pain. I know the pain of like when you like need to reorder something, you're like, this is not the way I wanted this. And then like you
Same.
drag it and then it slips back down and actually puts it in the wrong place. And you're like, as much as it's fun to move things around with the physicality, like being able to just like number it out the gate is so much faster.
Yeah. Yeah. And then like another big change has been the whole conditional situation, which that was the thing. Like, well, it took a while to get it to us, to
Hmm.
say the least. But when it was delivered, it was like, wow, anybody should be able to come in and use this and maintain it without
Yeah.
needing, you know, to move through a whole trailhead certification in order to understand, what's happening and why to use it and how to make it so it's not going to break a bunch of other
Hmm.
stuff that's already going on.
And
Just
I
to,
will say they're doing a great job of calling out where conditional logic is not yet enrolled. Like, and I will say like it is a great function and it's present in a lot of places, but places it's not present. Like a good example is in forms. If you're submitting a form and you use an object that has a property, sorry, that has conditional logic associated with it. So say like I think the example we were talking about before we got on was you have a ticket group, you might have a category, then you might have subcategories. You only want to show certain subcategories under specific categories. If you do that in a ticket form, right now it actually tells you it's like, hey, your conditional logic is here, but it's not going to be present. Which I think is a really good call out for people who are like, well, I've set it up, it should just work everywhere. They're making a point of calling out where it's not installed yet, and it's coming. If you're in the forms beta, I just got access today, no, yesterday. I got an email from the project manager. They started to roll out conditional logic in forms in the new forms beta, which is amazing because the new forms beta, if you haven't used it, is great. I'm just waiting for them to include ticket support because that's where I really need it. But right now it's just contacts and companies. But the ability to make like paste forms and separate pages in your forms is huge. Where instead of it being just like I've got plenty of forms right now where it's like 30 things because it needs to be 30 things, not because I want to make you fill out 30 properties, but it's just I need your shipping information and shipping information alone is like 5 properties. Like it's you
yeah,
want to like keep people engaged, but also not ask them, scare them away with like a 50 property form. So
right,
being able to kind of space that out and also skip stages if it's not necessary is huge.
right. Yeah. And I think that like Kyle's video today, he had me at the ability to skip steps and move back and forth
Oh
uh,
yeah.
while making properties, which I would imagine as they introduced sensitive info or that option,
Oh my
like
gosh.
add another
Yeah.
step, like that was like probably the biggest. I think I remember it being just an initial complaint from a lot of people. Like it's another thing I gotta click through.
Well, I
Um,
believe the initial version of it in the beta, and the version's out now. Well, I think it's out of beta. I hold myself to be correct if it's not out of beta, but if it isn't, I don't think it's in beta. I think it's out of beta. When it first came out in beta, I remember the conversation was around it made every property sensitive by default. And everyone's like, 9 times out of 10, that's not what I want. So it was adding an extra click because you have to click, no, it's not sensitive. Whereas they've now switched it to like not sensitive is the default. So you could skip through the process a little faster. But again, it's just an extra click where you're like, I don't need to do an extra click here. Um,
so I'm just playing around while you're talking about stuff. I do think
yeah.
this gives us an opportunity because the thing I don't have a lot of, and I'll send it to you. But I'm just going to click save here, just showing off some conditional property stuff while we're uh, talking. And then that was interesting. So I guess what I should have done there, because I didn't want to leave the area. I wasn't done yet, but I wanted to see um, some completed. Like I just wanted to see this. So did it actually save what I, yeah, so it's got 4 here. Okay, so it actually is asking me, it's making sure I address, or all the options are addressed now that I'm choosing to address one. So
Yeah.
basically, if I'm saying this controlling property uh, for this instance, that means all the other instances like are not managed, so they get all the options. That's interesting. I love guardrails like this, where it's like you can just have a singular focus. You're trying to fix a report or fix
Hmm.
a UI, and it's so easy to do that and forget, oh, this other option looks very similar. And if they pick that one, this thing is not going to happen the way I want it. Or,
Yeah.
right. So I love that, uh, what's going on there. So I guess, and what I need to do if I want to stay in is just move to the next or move to a different stage.
And that is the biggest difference if you go to create a property is instead of it being like next, click next, click next, you can now just navigate between these left sides and it will change based on the property, the field type you select.
Right.
And that's huge. So I don't know if you want to go ahead if you have a property you need to be created. Good old sample property is my favorite one to create when I'm trying new stuff out.
Yeah. Let's create a new property. Sample property is the one you go with.
My favorite property.
All right. And we got, oh, this is wonderful.
I was
Just,
waiting for you to find that. I'm like, the amount of times I've accidentally created things in contact because I wasn't paying
oh
attention
my
and now having the
God.
ability to like be reminded, hey, did you want to put it here?
And this opens the door. So I've been feeling like this whole time, like they've been setting the stage for a lot of this stuff, like the accessibility of it, the understanding of it. Like right
Yeah.
now, you're starting to, you're usually guided towards settings. We are moving towards the
Yeah.
future where you don't have to go to settings anymore to do the thing you do.
Yeah.
And if we can, now this means it's detached from that record choice first. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Uh, that is a good sign. And then we select the group. Let's say, uh, and then
Got to put your description in.
sample stuff. All right.
So I think this is the biggest change that a lot of people were like, wait, what? So like before you click like next and that now that's grayed out. And
Yeah.
instead you're going to click over in the left to field type. Essentially, when you select field type,
Yep.
it will ask you like a single checkbox, all those options. And I will say something that made me really excited. It's a very small change that you may not notice. If you click in a field type, you select a field type, they've added roll up as an option now,
Oh wow.
which is like, was this hidden property that like, it's just a calculation, but it's a specific type of calculation. Now roll up is actually an option, which I think is really nice.
That is very nice.
And also date time. Date time's now in there too. And it kind of coincide with this. You can now pick a date time, make a date time property versus just a date picker.
Got all of our texts together. Don't have to scroll all the way to the bottom to find rich text.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
They're just grouped so much better now.
yeah. So let's click. So I'm just going to make an assumption that I have things that we can build. Uh, can we do roll up or a calculation?
Yeah, sure. I
All
think the
right.
calculation one you will really like.
All
There's just so
right.
much more space to work.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I think this was probably just kind of a curation effort of the experience because as they started building these like massive additions to the process, like you were getting taken to different screens in a lot of cases,
Yeah.
anyways, right?
And that space is so much easier to use now that you have like just having the space to build out your calculation, not trying to work in a smaller box. It's huge.
And already got, oh, so it's actually knowing that I want to do this. Uh, and then, so let's say, uh, actual date of delivery to customer and actual date of delivery to us. Let's do actual date of pickup from us, actual date of delivery to us, which will say that as long as that's the time that the rental thing is out of our jurisdiction, out of our hands.
I do love that they put in a very cheeky box here about like, you're trying to base off of today's date, as I've picked the property today's date that I have created several times. Like, you recommend filters. I'm like, but I just want today's date.
Oh, I'm
I don't
so
know
happy
why.
to see this. Like
I like that it's actually telling people how to get around it for those of you who
the
don't want to build a today's date property.
right.
But I think it's really hard. Like, this is one of those weird things. You can use tools like, I mean, this is not, I'm not sponsored. If Happily wants to send me a shirt, I'll happily take one. But the
I'll let
TikTok today
Max
is
know.
great for this. Yeah.
Yeah.
TikTok today is great for that. If you need to build a today's date property, and they made it really accessible too, because it's now you get one for free, and you can just use property sync to move it around your stuff. Like, you don't necessarily need to go out unless you really need it on other custom objects. You can dump it on a company or dump it in tickets, which is where I see most people using it is in tickets. You can then track things like time open, things that are currently, you can make it visible on the record and in views where people are working versus being in reports. Because I think that's the biggest mismatch. And I've said that to HubSpot product people before, is that it's great that I can filter on today in a report, but the people who are managing tickets want to see where they're working this information and trying to make that data more clear in the places people work and not the places that we go to review work.
Right.
I think that's the biggest thing that I see too, is that a lot of people struggle the difference between like a dashboard and like utilizing index pages and views
Yes.
much better. And I'm excited because I know I think it was in Sprocketeer, there was one of the PMs for index pages was, and I actually met with them, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, and we were talking, and I mentioned she was showing me the ability to see other objects in index view. So you could have select deal and then show me all these, instead of saying associated companies and you get that little box that comes up, now you actually get like a mini index page of companies below it where you can make
Whoa.
changes. And it was nuts. And I was surprised because usually you'll see Figmas for stuff and it's like really like messy, but looked really good. It was like almost like a sub index page inside the index page for each line item that you selected. I'm like, that is huge, huge for
Yes.
people when, today we're doing a lot of stuff where we're moving data around or have previously been using workflows to move data around, and you have to fight with things like, now we use a lot of center cards, and center cards are awesome. Center cards are also great because they save as you go. But what doesn't help is center cards save as you go.
Yeah.
So if you have a property that triggers, if you have a workflow that triggers, and I've actually encountered this recently, where I have some workflows that run that move data from like one record to another record. So it'll be like a parent record to a child record, move this data over. And property sync doesn't work for us in that situation because like maybe it implies like I work in education. So like we might have property on a district and that information is relevant to the school. But of the 5 schools we service, one school might be on a different curriculum than the other 4 schools because they're testing something new. We need our people to edit that on the child. So we'll make 2 properties. We sync the data from the district to the school. When the district data is known and the school property is unknown, and you have like a couple of filters where like, is this known as unknown, or is this known as unknown, or is this known as unknown? The problem is previously people would fill out all the properties and click save, which would trigger it to go. Now, because it updates every time you enter a property, it'll trigger the workflow before they're done entering data. And sometimes they're still entering data when the workflow is running and the workflow won't read and roll. So I've had to add delays in places I haven't had delays before, just because the improvement to their experience is more important than it, in my opinion, the immediacy of the data being passed. So I'm like, you
Yes.
can wait 30 minutes, for this data to push. But like things like that are awesome improvements for the end user, but you have to keep in mind how that might affect your workflows in ways you didn't expect.
Right. No, and yeah, I think ultimately like creating these bigger spaces, like you mentioned, since we're pushing everything towards record views, or
Mm-hmm.
records index, like products, like all the objects can be seen
Yeah.
in there someday. And like it just creates more space to add information in more digestible ways, including stuff like I love the precedent that I'm hoping this sets when, like, I know why they did this, or I would imagine why they did this, because it's specifically today's date is involved and people have a lot of feelings about that.
A lot of
So they
feelings.
had to add in, but I see this as like it's a coaching precedent to say,
Yeah,
like, now there's a space, and because we're using this space, especially with properties, like, and I'm just thinking all of this real time, and it's like properties and creating too many or duplicate, that's the place that people screw up their HubSpot first, right?
yeah,
And having a space for coaching mechanisms like this, um, like, I'm sure this was like, you know, probably hard. It's hard coded in some way based on some specific factors here. But as we start involving
yeah.
AI, there's room to say, like, okay, Matthew, you've created like, 20 date properties like in the last couple of days. Like,
Yeah,
what might be happening here? Do you understand that you can use these tools to do this?
yeah.
Uh, you know, because you created 20 properties, half of them have not been filled in the last 2 weeks,
Oh,
right?
100%.
That kind of stuff. Like, as we create this extra space, like, we can do that. So that's where I'd, I'd ask admins to think in terms of like connecting, like, so this space, plus a lot of the understanding that we're getting here, right?
Yeah,
And I don't have, like, while we're live and talking about this, um, the new beta, uh, that is limits tracking tab in in the overview. Like, all this information we've always wanted to not have to go other places for. Pretty sure this is the one that, yeah, for the data model. I don't know if you've seen this
no.
yet.
I've been
Uh,
I've been slacking this week on updates. I know this specific update has been out, I think, for like 2 weeks. And I know for those of you who don't know, Kyle spreads out his updates so that he gets to send updates every day. But there are some weeks we get updates, we get like 6 or 7 things at once. And I'm like, I need all these things. I'm still waiting for someone to reach out to me about sales workspace because that's a huge one for me right now. As we're working
yes.
through like getting our sales team in a good spot, like that is a huge thing. But yeah, this is awesome.
So limits tab, and this is simple. Like, it's not like you could go get this from the knowledge base,
Yeah,
but only if it's updated, because they've been updating these limits, especially when it comes to custom objects.
yeah.
Um, but this is my first time clicking into this. But just
I'm curious to see associations.
uh,
Oh, I love that. They're like, don't worry about it, Chris. You got it. You're good.
I don't have any association at or above 80% usage limits. Sit and rest.
I
Okay,
appreciate those little things. I think my
maybe
second
not the
favorite,
direction of coaching that I appreciate right now.
I mean, my favorite, I think, coachable moment from HubSpot is when I think it's when you're mass editing. I think it's more, I think the trigger is more than 100 or like more than 25, I think. It's like the default's 25 records on index page. If you update more than 25 records on index page, HubSpot comes up and it'll be like, you're about to mass update, like 37 records. That's a lot of records. Are you sure about that?
Yeah.
I just imagine like that one guy that Instagram reel where it's just like, are you sure about that? Like it takes that moment where I do read it, and every time I kind of go, yeah, I do want to do this. Like it gives you that moment of just pause, and I think that speaks more to like HubSpot's this, how they want to interact with people and like how they want to come across is not just like a boring system with like Windows style errors. It's just like error contact admin. It's more, friendly and more like respecting that not everyone's going to be a 10 times black belt, scrum master, whatever in the tool. And people are going to be new and they're going to make mistakes and they can put those protections in place, which I think is awesome.
Yeah.
I'm scared that this exists because now I'm going to go back and look and see how bad our limits are.
Right. No, I think this is fantastic in most spots. I think something that jumps out that could improve, like, if I got multiple labels here, like, uh, this is where it's like being way too picky here. But like I had to click it. Like if you're gonna, it's basically if you're gonna show me some of the labels, but there's no way
Sure.
for me to see all of them,
Okay,
or it
what does it
says
say when you
it says
click to view all?
click to view, right? It takes me to over.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
That's not bad. I
it's
remember
fair.
this. I remember being
No,
on a call with a PM about this.
this is fair.
It's actually
No,
coming out.
yeah, no, this is another way you get to this. Uh,
Yeah.
is
I
like
I,
a
I
modal.
remember being on a PM with we were talking about how do we show when they brought out the you can do different labels. So you can do like the label shows differently on one record versus another record. I remember being on a call with a PM and it was like an hour long call, and there was a point where just like we're not going to please everyone, but we have to find the way that's the closest. And I will say, I think what they ended up landing on is better than what I suggested. But I do love when you associate things now in a record. It shows you what it looks like on both records. So you can see in real time, it's going to look like this on one and this on another if you're using different labels, because it's very confusing. It's very like if you don't, you have to sit back and think about your associations and how it's going to work. And I think they've done a really good job of setting that up now.
Yeah, and then I mean, when I found this one, I show it off whenever I can. Just the ability to see these association IDs very easily when
Yeah,
you're making CMS modules and stuff like that is huge. Um, so we could go on, we could click through this stuff all day. But super exciting to see this. Like they're continuing to, I mean, if anything, since they've focused on such a fast pace of development, they're building like how to develop product at that fast pace. They're building those muscles, and it feels
yeah.
like they're getting better at it.
I will definitely say it feels like they're doing a lot more incremental updates, which is huge. And I think it's really it's something that is not. I don't think HubSpot markets on it as much, but it's they're not the people who care about it are not the people who they're marketing to some extent. So like as an admin, like I care about that where it's like it's just the incremental changes are really big because it kind of shows you their roadmap maybe without them having to reveal their hand so much. Because like when they make a change like this to properties, you know new features are coming out. It's not a change to some extent. It's not a change because they think it looks prettier. It's because we want to launch new things and we realize the current thing doesn't fit that. It's going to be
Right,
clunky and disgusting. Like let's redesign it so you get used to the redesign, and then when we introduce new features, you're like, that makes sense. I know why they did that now. Like I know
right,
why they gave us all this room. I know why they gave these all this space for the left or sidebars. Um, to some extent, I think that was the struggle with the global redesign. I remember talking to the PM for that at Inbound last year, and I was fortunate to be in the private beta for it, or the private alpha actually for it. And I was talking to him. He was like, "We went through many, we went through many changes, and it was painful for me because it would like I would just get used to it. And then they make a change. I'm like, ah, and for the long time, that sidebar did not collapse. That was a thing that I begged for several times because I was like, please make the sidebar collapse. I need it to collapse. I'm losing space. So things like that, but people have now adapted to it, and you can see why they made that change. The new workspaces like would not have fit in the previous model.
right.
It's just I don't know if you're in. I don't know if this is a beta. I think it might be a beta. There's a new create functionality in the
Yeah,
top bar. I will, where
yeah.
it says like create ticket, create contact, create
There's a
deal. Like you
plus.
can do it all from the top. You get that plus.
Yeah,
That is a huge change too because it gives you that flexibility.
and somebody brought it up yesterday. Actually, I think they made a good case at least for you know having options to have some of this stuff on or off would be nice because
Yeah,
the thing that they reminded me of because literally I try not to take all the credit for this stuff, but I was on with a PM and we were talking about global search, and I was like, just like at the end of the call, I'm like, by the way, sometimes I just click on the search so that I can now click this create content button that is now at the bottom of the screen. Sometimes that's the only reason I click on it, and then 2 days later, that plus icon
the
showed
plus
up,
came out.
and I was like,
Were
okay,
you
this
talking
is
to
cool.
Rob? I feel like that's
Uh,
Rob.
it was Chase.
Okay, because yeah,
She,
Rob's on global UI. So I was like, that's
right.
what I was like. If you're talking to Rob, I'm like, I know Rob.
Yeah.
That's who I met at Inbound. We met in person. But no, I agree. Like I think there's funny, and they'll even tell you about it. It's funny, like they'll track like all things. They're tracking how we use tools and how we're using tools. And they said there's stuff they never thought of, but entirely comes up users like, okay, we put this in here as a nice to have. But like you said, like now we're noticing people are actually clicking this. They're going to search to create a contact. Why would they not go to contacts to create a contact? But because
Right.
it's just easier flow. It's just an easier
Yeah.
thing to do. So like
Yeah.
adding that plus was just like an obvious like, well, let's skip you a skip. Like instead of you
Right.
clicking search, like now you can click and create a ticket and a deal. And I know in the future, custom objects will come out of there too. And I believe that's going to be something you can turn off and on. Like it's something you can create a custom object. You don't like if you don't want that to be an option there, you can take it out. But I know I have custom objects. I don't need people creating them. I need them just they get
Yeah.
created by workflows, but
And just
it's an
to
awesome feature to have.
provide the visual is this
Yeah.
create button, right? Contact company deal ticket. And what I was reminded of yesterday, which I clearly know about, but you don't think about until it actually happens, is when you're training the users of the system, like
Mm-hmm.
especially when creating deals, like there is a flow. Like if you want to get to the deal and make sure everything is associated, you create a deal from a contact record and it's
Yeah.
automatically associated, right? You lose that here. And this is the double edged sword of HubSpot when you give all these different options to
Yeah.
create things, right? Um, but it's good to have the option. And again, I don't necessarily like thinking about product development. We always try to get to the point where it's like push button, get cookie. When in reality, if we just focused way more on enablement and training and empowerment,
Yeah.
then you just make things easier because you know you don't have to build in all of these restrictions and guidelines.
Yeah.
So yeah, just wanted to share that. That was cool.
Oh, 100%. And then hopefully one day I'll be able to have multiple associations when they create a record. One day,
Yeah.
I hope. Because right now you can set it. Because I have this set up for our deals. Is like when they create one of our custom objects we use for implementation, it says like you have to associate that company, and that company has to have this association label. But right now you can only pick one. And like for us, that sometimes doesn't work. We need to be able to pick, like I need them to associate a district and a school to this object. And like they have to pick one or the other. So, I pick the one that's easier. And then thankfully with the new association workflow actions, which I know is not what we're here to talk about, but we can talk about that one day, you can now like pre-arrange associations. Like, okay, if this is associated and there's no district, associate the district, like you can do that step for people. So it just makes it a lot easier to like I always say my goal as an admin is to make the end user's life simpler and make the HubSpot experience fade away for them, where it's not I'm using HubSpot. I want to get to a point where it just becomes I'm doing my job, and it's less I'm having to go to HubSpot. It becomes less of a sticking point for them.
Right.
Um, and I've seen it happen, and it's hard with a lot of organizations, especially when you're young and you're scaling and things are changing a lot. You have to make a lot of quick changes, and then you end up in property debt, which I think is a great segue to what we should talk about next week, which is property debt and how do you clean up
Yes.
effectively? Because
Nah,
that is,
I'd love to learn about that because
oh,
that's
I mean,
hard.
I'm still
That's
learning
hard.
about it,
Yeah.
but it's hard. And as these new features come out, I think it's as admins, you have to think about auditing is not a one-time task. It is definitely something you should be going back and doing and setting as a reoccurring activity for you and building into your roadmap. No matter how you work, if you choose to work in a sort of I work in a what I refer to as not so agile, where it's like it's kind of agile, but not really. But, I make a point of like once a month, doing some sort of audit on something at least once a month.
Right.
So you can still deliver new tools and you can still deliver changes and optimization, but auditing and optimization are not the same thing. And I think that's something a lot of people confuse where they'll think, well, if I'm auditing, I'm optimizing. I'm like, well, no, you're auditing to make sure that you don't have things you're not using.
Right.
Optimizing is looking at the process and going, is the process working?
Yeah.
Auditing is going in and saying, is my data in the right places? They're similar, but they're not the same thing. They overlap, but they're not the same thing. So I think it's a great segue for what we talk about next week. I don't know if we
Yeah.
didn't have a plan for next week, so I think that's a great.
No, I love it. Oh, this is why I don't like having all the plans because then Kyle reminds
Yeah.
us of a sweet new thing we could talk about that is very specific to the theme of the
Mm-hmm.
show, and we get to just talk about it like we planned it, but we didn't.
Mm-hmm.
So on that note, maybe a little bit of planning goes into your property sometimes.
Sometime.
uh, so, but definitely recommend this beta. Um,
Yes.
check it out. Provide feedback. Like just to
Oh yeah.
touch on that, like the feedback loop that team has created is why they're able to move that fast, and they listen.
Yes.
uh, they might not do everything you want right away, but they are doing things in the best interest of the platform and their users, and I mean, it's
100%.
creating the best platform available for us. So
I
um,
agree. Like if that little Pendo, I hope I don't know if it's Pendo or not. I assume it's Pendo. That's what I know most of. But like if that pop up comes up, I'm always like, even if you have nothing to say, at least acknowledge whether the thing is working the way you expect it to. Whether it like I always say that like most of the PMs I've talked to is like they don't care if you give them no type. Like if you give a bad response, if you say no and you give some context, 9 times out of 10 they will actually reach out to you. So it's like if you even if you have positive feedback, I've had the PMs reach out to me and say, "Hey, I see you gave this really positive praise for something we didn't expect. So can you explain why you said that?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." Like the HubSpot product team is really good at listening to everyone, whether it's partners. Partners have a really good way to reach out to the HubSpot product team. But even as someone like myself who is an administrator at a company who does some contracting on the side, I I think it's super important that like you have that relationship with the HubSpot product team in any way. They're such a great group of people, and they are very open to feedback. And there's very few companies I could say with full certainty like where I've had such a good feedback loop. I mean, there's partners actually HubSpot app partners that kind of mirror that in such a great way.
yeah,
People like Arrows, I've worked with them a lot. RevOps.io for CPQ tool, like I've worked with them a lot. They have really follow that same track of like just really listening to their customers. So if you can find a company that's invested that way, they are great partners to work with.
yes, I agree, and that's one of the many things that makes this ecosystem different than most others. So as you get into this beta, feel it out. Like there might be some sticker shock. Just take a minute, take a deep breath, like click on some stuff. You're in HubSpot. You should be used to this at this point. Stuff changing, but
Mm-hmm.
you did just click on the opt-in, so maybe there's that. Find some opportunities for yourself and your team and your properties, and let's grow. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Take care.